The rain drummed against the window of 17-year-old Marcus Chen's bedroom as he stared at his laptop screen, the numbers blurring through tears he refused to let fall. His investment portfolio, 3 years of lawn mowing money, birthday, gifts and part-time job earnings had vanished overnight. $23,000 gone. The cryptocurrency he'd been so confident about had crashed by 97%, taking with it not just his money, but his dreams of paying for college without burdening his immigrant parents. The phone rang. Marcus almost didn't answer. The last thing he needed was another telemarketer, or worse, one of his friends, asking how his brilliant investment strategy was working out. But something made him pick up on the fourth ring. "Hello, Marcus." The voice was gentle, grandfatherly, with a slight Nebraska drawl that seemed oddly familiar. "This is Warren Buffett. I believe we need to talk." Marcus blinked, certain he was hallucinating from stress and sleep deprivation. "I'm sorry. Who is this really?" "I know it sounds impossible, son, but I read about your story online. How you'd been studying value investing, how you'd saved every penny, and how you lost it all when you strayed from those principles. Sometimes, when someone reminds me of myself at that age, I feel compelled to reach out." The teenager's hands trembled as he gripped the phone. "Mr. Buffett, if this is really you, I feel like such an idiot. I threw away everything I worked for." "Marcus," Warren's voice carried the weight of decades of wisdom, "failing isn't the end of your story. It's often the beginning of the most important chapter. Would you be willing to meet me? I'd like to share something with you. A story about another young person who once lost everything, and what that taught me about the real value of wealth." 2 days later, Marcus found himself on a plane to Omaha, funded by a ticket that had mysteriously appeared in his email, along with a simple message: "Sometimes the most valuable investments are the ones we make in people." Warren Buffett's office wasn't what Marcus had expected. No gleaming skyscraper, no army of assistants, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Instead, he found himself in a modest building, sitting across from the world's most famous investor, in a room that felt more like a favorite uncle's study than a billionaire's headquarters. "You're surprised," Warren observed, noting Marcus's expression as he looked around at the simple furniture and stacks of books and newspapers. "Most people expect someone with my net worth to live differently. But you see, Marcus, the money was never the point. The money is just what happens when you do everything else right." Warren leaned back in his well-worn chair, his eyes twinkling with the kind of warmth that immediately put people at ease. "I want to tell you about someone I met 68 years ago. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was about your age when she lost everything too. But her story changed my life in ways that no stock pick or business deal ever." "Good." Marcus sat forward, captivated despite his embarrassment and grief. "It was 1957, Warren began, his voice taking on the cadence of a man revisiting cherished memories. "I was 27 years old, cocky as they come, running my little investment partnership. I thought I had all the answers. I'd made some good picks. My investors were happy, and I was convinced that success was just about being smarter than everyone else." Warren paused, gazing out the window at the Nebraska landscape he'd never left behind, despite having enough money to live anywhere in the world. "That autumn, I was driving through the south side of Omaha, looking at some potential real estate investments. The neighborhood was rough, the kind of place where hope goes to die, where families work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I stopped at a small grocery store, family-owned, the kind that was barely hanging on against the big chains moving in." Marcus could see Warren's expression soften as he continued. "Behind the counter was this teenage girl, probably 16, maybe 17. She was doing homework while managing the register, helping customers in both English and Spanish. keeping an eye on two younger siblings who were playing in the corner. There was something about her, this quiet dignity, this determination that reminded me of my own mother during the Depression. Warren stood and walked to a small photograph on his desk, one that Marcus hadn't noticed before. It showed a young Hispanic woman in graduation robes standing next to a much younger Warren Buffett. I bought a Coca-Cola and struck up a conversation. Her name was Elena, and she was the oldest of 5 children. Her parents worked in the packing houses, and this little store was their American dream, their way of building something for their family. But they were struggling. The big supermarket chain had opened 2 blocks away, and their customers were drifting away week by week. Warren returned to his chair, the photograph still in his hands. Elena was taking advanced mathematics and had been accepted to the University of Nebraska, but she was planning to turn down the scholarship. "My family needs me," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "The store needs me. My siblings need me. Dreams are a luxury we can't afford right now." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. His own parents had sacrificed so much to come to America, to give him opportunities they'd never had. He understood that weight of family responsibility. "I couldn't stop thinking about that girl," Warren continued. "Here was someone with incredible potential, making calculations and serving customers with equal skill, but trapped by circumstances. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. See, Marcus, I'd grown up with advantages, not wealthy, mind you, but comfortable. My father was a congressman. I had connections, opportunities. Elena had twice my work ethic and probably more raw intelligence, but none of my luck." Warren's voice grew quieter, more reflective. "The next week I did something I'd never done before and haven't done many times since. I made an investment based purely on instinct and heart rather than numbers and analysis. I went back to the Rodriguez family store on a Saturday morning," Warren continued, settling deeper into his chair as if the memory was pulling him back through the decades. Elena was there again, this time with her father, Miguel. He was a proud man. You could see it in the way he carried himself, despite the worry lines etched around his eyes. The kind of man who'd rather lose everything than accept charity. Warren chuckled softly at the memory. "I had to be careful. Pride like that is precious. It's often all people have left when everything else is taken away. So I didn't offer charity. I offered a partnership." Marcus leaned forward, completely absorbed now in this story that was unfolding like the best kind of mystery. "I told Miguel I was looking to diversify my investments into local businesses with strong family management and growth potential. I offered to buy a 40% stake in the store for $15,000. Enough to modernize, expand their inventory, maybe add a small deli section to compete with the big chains." Warren's eyes sparkled with the memory. Miguel was suspicious, of course. Who wouldn't be? A young white investor wanting to partner with a struggling Mexican-American family in 1957. But Elena. She looked at me with those sharp eyes and asked exactly the right questions. "What's your expected return? What control are you looking for? What happens if we can't pay you back?" I told them the truth, that I expected a modest return, maybe 8 to 10% annually, that I wanted no control over day-to-day operations, and that if the business failed, we'd fail together. No personal guarantees, no liens on their home, a true partnership. Warren paused, and Marcus could see emotions playing across the older man's face. Pride, sadness, joy, all mixed together. "But here's what I really invested in, Marcus. I didn't just give them money. I gave them my time, my knowledge, my connections. Every Saturday for 2 years, I spent my morning at Rodriguez Family Market. Not as an owner checking up on his investment, but as a friend who happened to know something about business." Warren stood again and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder that looked like it had been handled countless times over the decades. I taught Elena about inventory management, about understanding profit margins, about the difference between revenue and profit. I showed Miguel how to negotiate with suppliers, how to read financial statements, how to plan for growth. But more importantly, they taught me things I never learned in any economics class. Warren opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, letters, photographs, a lifetime's worth of memories carefully preserved. They showed me what it means to work, not just for yourself, but for your family's future. What it means to serve your community, to know every customer's name, to care about whether Mrs. Thompson can afford her groceries this week or if young Jimmy has enough lunch money. Warren pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1959. The headline read, "Local grocery store expands, hires neighborhood youth." Within 18 months, Rodriguez Family Market was thriving. They'd added that deli section, expanded their produce, and started carrying specialty items for the growing immigrant community. Elena had graduated as valedictorian and was thriving. At the university, studying business and economics. She'd work at the store evenings and weekends, applying what she learned in class to the family business. Warren's voice took on a note of pride that Marcus realized wasn't about financial returns, but about something much deeper. But the most remarkable thing happened in Elena's junior year of college. She came to me with a proposal. She wanted to start a small loan program through the store, microloans to help other immigrant families start their own businesses. "Mr. Buffett," she said, "you gave us a chance when no bank would even talk to us. There are dozens of families in this neighborhood with the same dreams, the same work ethic, but no access to capital." Marcus felt his breath catch. "What did you do?" "I did what Elena taught me to do," Warren replied. "I listened, really listened. She had done her research, identified 12 families who wanted to start everything from restaurants to cleaning services to construction companies. She had a screening process, a mentorship program, a plan for how the store could serve as a hub for this network of small businesses." Warren carefully pulled out a photograph from 1962, a group of about 30 people standing in front of the expanded Rodriguez Family Market, all smiling, many in work clothes or business attire. "We started the Rodriguez Community Investment Fund with $50,000. My contribution and some money Elena had convinced her family to invest. Within 3 years, we'd helped launch 18 small businesses. The beauty of it was that Elena understood something I was just beginning to learn. The best investments aren't just about returns. They're about creating value that multiplies through entire communities." Warren's voice grew softer, more reflective. "Elena graduated summa cum laude in 1961, got a job offer from a big accounting firm in Chicago. Great salary, prestige, everything a young person could want. You know what she did instead?" Marcus shook his head, though he was beginning to suspect. "She came back to the neighborhood, opened a small accounting office above the family store, specializing in helping immigrant families and small businesses navigate taxes, licenses, financial planning. She charged what people could afford, sometimes working for groceries or home-cooked meals instead of cash." Warren carefully returned the photographs to the folder, handling them like precious artifacts. By 1965, our little 40% investment in a struggling grocery store had turned into something no spreadsheet could capture. The Rodriguez Family Market was the anchor of a thriving business district. Elena's accounting practice was helping dozens of families build wealth legally and sustainably. The Community Loan Fund had a 96% repayment rate, better than most banks. Warren looked directly at Marcus, his expression serious but kind. "My financial return was excellent, better than most of my stock picks from that era. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that I learned the difference between making money and creating value, between being rich and being wealthy." In 1968, Warren continued, settling back into his storytelling rhythm, Eleanor came to me with news that changed everything. She was pregnant with her first child, and she and her husband, a teacher she'd met at the university, wanted to buy their own home. But more than that, she wanted to expand what we'd started. Warren pulled out another set of documents, these more formal-looking than the earlier photographs and clippings. She proposed something that was revolutionary for its time, a community development corporation that would combine retail, financial services, and education. The grocery store would anchor a small shopping center. Her accounting practice would grow into a full community financial center, offering everything from tax preparation to business loans to financial literacy classes. And she wanted to add a tutoring center for immigrant children struggling with English. Marcus could hear the admiration in Warren's voice, even after all these decades. She had a 5-year business plan that was more sophisticated than proposals I was seeing from MBA graduates. She understood market analysis, demographic trends, regulatory requirements, but more than that, she understood her community in ways that no outsider could. Warren paused, and Marcus could see something shift in his expression. A shadow of sadness mixed with pride. I wish I could tell you that Elena's story had a completely happy ending, Marcus. Life isn't that simple, and neither are the lessons that matter most. Warren walked to the window, gazing out at the city he'd called home his entire life. In 1969, Elena was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was 29 years old, mother of a 2-year-old daughter with everything to live for. This was before modern treatments, before the survival rates we see today. Marcus felt his heart sink. He'd become invested in Elena's story, in her success, in the community she'd built. But here's what I learned about real strength during those 2 years of Elena's illness, Warren continued, his voice steady but emotional. She never stopped working, not because she had to financially. By then, her businesses were successful enough that she could have stepped back. She kept working because she understood something about purpose that I was just beginning to grasp. Warren returned to his desk and pulled out a letter, the paper aged to a warm yellow, the handwriting careful and precise. 3 months before she died, Elena wrote me this letter. I've read it thousands of times over the years, and it's shaped every major decision I've made since. Warren adjusted his glasses and began to read. Dear Warren, I know you're worried about what will happen to our businesses, our community projects, our loan fund when I'm gone. I want you to know that none of that matters as much as what you've already given me, the chance to see what I could become when someone believed in my potential. Warren's voice caught slightly as he continued. The money you invested in our store wasn't just capital, it was faith. Faith that a teenage immigrant girl could learn to think like a businesswoman. Faith that her family's dreams mattered as much as any Fortune 500 company's quarterly projections. Faith that communities could be transformed one relationship at a time. Warren paused, collecting himself before reading the letter's conclusion. I need you to promise me something. I need you to remember that the best investments you'll ever make won't show up in any portfolio report. They'll show up in the lives of people who got a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. They'll show up in communities that become stronger because someone cared enough to see their potential. Warren carefully folded the letter and returned it to its place in the folder. Elena died in February 1971. She was 31 years old. At her funeral, I counted over 200 people whose lives she'd directly impacted, business owners she'd helped, children she'd tutored, families who'd received loans from our fund. Her 2-year-old daughter Sophia was there, not understanding why everyone was crying for her mama. Marcus realized he was crying himself, moved by this story of a woman he'd never met, but who felt more real to him than most people he knew personally. What happened to Sophia? Marcus asked quietly. Warren's expression brightened, the sadness lifting like clouds parting to reveal sunshine. That, Marcus, is where Elena's real legacy begins. After Elena's funeral, Warren continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of careful stewardship, I had a choice to make. I could liquidate our investments, distribute the proceeds, and walk away with a respectable profit and a clear conscience. Or I could honor Elena's vision by continuing what she'd started. Warren opened another section of his thick folder, revealing documents that showed the evolution of their partnership over the following decades. Elena's husband, Roberto, was a good man, a dedicated teacher, loving father to Sophia, but he wasn't a business person. The community was looking to me to provide leadership, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was worthy of that trust. I was 31 years old, successful with stocks and bonds, but Elena had taught me that real wealth creation was about so much more than financial instruments. Warren pulled out a photograph from the early 1970s, showing a young Warren standing next to a sign, reading, Rodriguez Community Development Center. I made a commitment that would change my entire approach to business and investing. Instead of simply managing Elena's business interests, I would spend one day every week, every single week, working directly in the community she'd loved. Not as a consultant or advisor, but as a participant. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. Warren Buffett, even as his own wealth was growing exponentially, spending every Saturday in a working-class neighborhood in Omaha. Every Saturday morning for 15 years, Marcus. From 1971 to 1986, I was there when Sophia took her first steps around the grocery store. I was there when the Community Loan Fund helped its 100th family start a business. I was there when we opened the tutoring center that Elena had dreamed of. Warren's voice filled with pride as he continued. But more importantly, I was there to learn. Elena's neighbors taught me about resilience I'd never imagined, about finding joy in small victories, about the difference between poverty and being broke. Poverty is a mindset. Being broke is just a temporary financial condition. Warren stood and walked to a wall where a series of plaques and certificates were displayed. Not awards for his investment prowess, but recognitions from community organizations, schools, and small business associations. By 1980, our original $15,000 investment in Rodriguez Family Market had grown into a community development portfolio worth over $2 million. The grocery store had become the anchor of a thriving business district. The loan fund had helped create over 300 jobs. The tutoring center was sending immigrant children to college at rates that rivaled the best suburban school districts. Warren turned back to Marcus, his eyes bright with memory. But the most important investment was just beginning to mature. Warren retrieved a graduation program from 1989, University of Nebraska College of Business. Sophia Rodriguez graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and social work. She was 20 years old, brilliant like her mother, but with something Eleanor never had, the confidence that comes from growing up knowing that anything is possible. Warren's voice took on the proud tone of a grandfather sharing news about his favorite grandchild. Sophia came to me right after graduation with a proposal that took my breath away. She wanted to franchise the community development model we'd created in South Omaha. She'd identified 12 other cities with similar demographics and challenges, places where immigrant communities were struggling to build wealth and businesses. Despite having tremendous work ethic and untapped talent, Warren pulled out a business plan that was clearly well-worn from multiple readings and discussions. Her presentation was masterful, Marcus. She'd done 2 years of research as part of her senior thesis. She understood the financing requirements, the regulatory challenges, the cultural adaptations needed for different communities. But more than that, she understood the human element that no business school teaches. Warren opened the business plan to a page marked with a yellow sticky note, clearly a passage he'd returned to many times. Sophia wrote, "Community development isn't about imposing solutions from outside. It's about amplifying the strengths that already exist within communities and providing access to the tools and capital needed to build sustainable prosperity." Warren looked directly at Marcus. She was 20 years old, and she understood something about wealth creation that most seasoned investors never grasp. In 1990, Warren continued, his storytelling now taking on the rhythm of a man sharing his life's greatest accomplishment. Sophia and I launched Rodriguez Community Development Network with an initial capitalization of $10 million, the largest single investment I'd made outside of publicly traded securities. Warren retrieved a map from his folder, marked with colored pins showing locations across the American Midwest and Southwest. Within 5 years, we had established community development centers in Phoenix, Denver, Kansas City, San Antonio, and 8 other cities. Each center followed Elena's original model: retail anchor, financial services, educational programs, micro-lending, but adapted to local cultures and needs. Warren's finger traced across the map as he spoke, each pin representing years of careful relationship building and investment. The Phoenix Center specialized in construction and landscaping businesses, trades where immigrant workers were building valuable skills, but struggling to transition from employees to business owners. The Denver Center focused on restaurant and food service enterprises. San Antonio developed a program for women entrepreneurs that became a model replicated nationwide. Marcus was starting to grasp the scope of what Warren was describing. Not just business success, but a systematic approach to community transformation that had been operating quietly for decades. By 1995, the Rodriguez Network had facilitated over $2 billion in community investment, Warren continued. But those numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in the families who built generational wealth, the children who became the first in their families to attend college, the neighborhoods that transformed from areas of disinvestment to thriving business districts. Warren pulled out a thick album filled with photographs, ribbon cuttings, graduation ceremonies, family celebrations, community events spanning decades. Sophia had become one of the most effective community development professionals in the country, but she never lost Elena's focus on individual relationships. She knew the name of every business owner we'd supported, every student who'd gone through our tutoring programs, every family that had received a loan. Warren's voice carried deep satisfaction as he continued. In 1998, Sophia married a wonderful man, David Chen, an immigration attorney who shared her commitment to community service. They settled in Omaha, and Sophia took over day-to-day leadership of the entire network. Marcus startled at the familiar surname. Chen, like my Warren smiled. Your grandfather Marcus, David Chen, was your grandfather. The room seemed to spin as Marcus processed this revelation. His grandfather, who had died when Marcus was only 8, had been married to the daughter of the woman whose story had captivated him for the past hour. Your grandmother Sophia is Elena's daughter, Warren said gently, which makes you Elena's great-grandson, which makes you family, Marcus. Which is why, when I read about a young investor named Marcus Chen who had lost his savings trying to get rich quick, I knew I had to reach out. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the cascade of connections, the realization that his own story was woven into this larger narrative that had been unfolding for decades before his birth. Your grandmother never talked much about the community development work, did she? Warren asked kindly. She was always focused on the present, your education, your opportunities, your future, but she called me when you started getting interested in investing. She was worried you might make the same mistakes I made when I was young, thinking that being smart was enough, that making money quickly was better than building wealth sustainably. Warren's expression grew serious. She was right to worry, Marcus, because the most dangerous time in any investor's life is right after their first big success. Success breeds overconfidence, and overconfidence breeds carelessness. Warren's expression grew more serious as he continued Marcus's family story. In 2008, Marcus, your grandmother Sophia, faced her greatest test as a business leader. The financial crisis hit community development organizations particularly hard. Our borrowers were often the first to lose jobs, the last to get credit, the most vulnerable to economic shocks. Warren pulled out a series of financial reports. From 2008 and 2009, the numbers telling a stark story of economic distress. Within 6 months, the Rodriguez network saw loan defaults rise from our historical rate of 4% to nearly 18%. 3 of our community centers were forced to close temporarily. The micro-lending program that had been Sophia's pride was on the verge of collapse. Warren's voice carried the weight of those difficult memories. I remember getting a call from Sophia in November 2008. She was crying, something I'd never heard before. "Warren," she said, "I think I've failed my mother's legacy. I think I've lost everything she worked to build." Marcus could imagine his grandmother's anguish, the weight of responsibility she must have felt to honor her mother's memory while protecting the community that depended on their programs. That was when Sophia taught me perhaps the most important lesson about true wealth, Warren continued. Instead of cutting programs or pulling back from the community, she doubled down. She took out a personal loan against her own home to keep the tutoring centers open. She worked 18-hour days, helping families navigate foreclosure proceedings and unemployment benefits. Warren's voice filled with admiration. But more than that, she organized something I'd never seen before. She turned the crisis into a community organizing opportunity. She brought together all the business owners we'd helped over the years and created a mutual support network. Warren pulled out photographs from community meetings held in 2009. Rooms packed with people, faces showing strain but also determination. Sophia convinced the successful business owners to hire workers from the struggling ones. She negotiated group purchasing agreements to reduce costs for everyone. She created a community currency system that kept money circulating locally even when banks weren't lending. Warren's eyes lit up as he described Sophia's innovation during the crisis. Most importantly, she turned the Rodriguez network into a laboratory for economic resilience. Instead of just helping individual businesses survive, she was creating systems that would make entire communities stronger and more resistant to future economic shocks. Marcus was beginning to understand that his grandmother's work was far more sophisticated and impactful than he'd ever realized growing up. By 2012, not only had the Rodriguez network recovered from the financial crisis, it had emerged stronger than ever, Warren continued. Sophia had developed models for community-based economic development that were being studied by universities and replicated by organizations across the country. Warren pulled out a newspaper article from the Wall Street Journal, dated 2015, with the headline, "The Quiet Revolution: How Community Development Networks Are Creating Sustainable Prosperity in America's Immigrant Communities." Your grandmother was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, Marcus, not as Warren Buffett's business partner, but as one of America's most innovative community development practitioners. The article called her the woman who proved that patient capital and deep community relationships could create economic opportunity that survives market cycles. Warren's voice carried deep pride. But Sophia never forgot the lessons her mother had taught about humility and service. Even as the Rodriguez network grew to manage over $500 million in community assets, Sophia continued to spend time in each community center, knowing families by name, celebrating graduations and business openings. Warren paused, looking directly at Marcus. Which brings us to why you're here, son. Because your gambling with cryptocurrency wasn't just about your own money. It was about forgetting the values that your family has spent 3 generations building. Warren's expression grew gentler as he prepared to explain how Marcus's story had come to his attention. 3 weeks ago, Marcus, your grandmother Sophia called me. She was worried about you, but she was also heartbroken. Warren pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a screenshot of an online forum post that made Marcus's stomach drop with recognition and shame. She'd seen your posts on Reddit and TikTok, talking about generational wealth and getting rich quick with crypto. You were calling traditional investing boomer advice and saying that patient, long-term wealth building was for people who didn't understand how modern markets worked. Marcus cringed, remembering his confident posts from just a month ago when his cryptocurrency holdings were up 300%. He'd felt so smart, so ahead of the curve, so superior to the old-fashioned investors like his grandmother who preached patience and fundamentals. Sophia was crying when she called me, Warren continued softly. Not because you'd lost money. Money can always be earned back. She was crying because she felt like she'd failed to pass on the most important lessons your great-great-grandmother Eleanor had died trying to teach. Warren set his phone aside and leaned forward, his expression serious but compassionate. Your grandmother told me about the fights you'd been having. How you'd rolled your eyes when she tried to talk to you about investing principles. How you'd dismissed her community development work as small time compared to the real money being made in cryptocurrency and tech stocks. Marcus felt overwhelmed with shame. Every word Warren was describing was accurate. He had dismissed his grandmother's wisdom, had been impatient with her stories about slow, steady wealth building, had been convinced that his generation understood money in ways previous generations couldn't. Sophia asked me if I would be willing to meet with you, Warren continued, not to lecture you or make you feel worse about your losses, but to help you understand why those losses might be the most valuable thing that ever happened to you. Warren stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a worn leather journal. This belonged to your great-great-grandmother Elena, Warren said, handling the journal with obvious reverence. Sophia gave it to me years ago, but she asked me to share it with you now. Warren opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read Eleanor's handwriting, translated from Spanish. October 15th, 1969. The cancer is getting worse, but my mind is still clear. I want to write down the most important lessons for Sophia, for her children, for all the generations that will come after us. Warren's voice was gentle as he continued reading Elena's words. True wealth is not about having money. True wealth is about having choices. Money gives you choices, but only if you understand the difference between building wealth and chasing profits. Warren looked up at Marcus. Your great-great-grandmother wrote this while she was dying, Marcus. She was 29 years old with a toddler daughter facing the end of her life. But she was thinking about generations she would never meet, including you. Warren continued reading from Elena's journal. Building wealth means thinking like a farmer, not like a gambler. Farmers plant seeds, tend the soil, wait for seasons to change, harvest carefully, save seeds for next year's planting. Gamblers put everything on one bet and hope luck will make them rich. Marcus felt tears starting in his eyes as he realized how perfectly Elena's words described his own recent behavior, the very gambling mentality she'd warned against 5 decades before his birth. The most dangerous moment for any young person, Warren continued reading, is when they make their first big profit quickly. Success without understanding is more dangerous than failure, because failure teaches humility, while unearned success teaches arrogance. Warren closed the journal gently. Elena wrote those words in 1969, Marcus. But she could have been writing about your cryptocurrency adventure in 2024. Warren carefully returned Elena's journal to its place on the shelf, then turned back to Marcus with an expression that mixed seriousness with anticipation. Marcus, there's something your grandmother Sophia never told you. Something she was waiting to share until you were old enough to understand the responsibility that comes with it. Warren walked back to his desk and pulled out a legal document that looked official and substantial. When Elena died in 1971, she left behind more than just her businesses and her dreams. She left behind a trust fund managed jointly by me and Sophia, designated for her future descendants who showed both aptitude for business and commitment to community service. Marcus felt his breath catch. A trust fund. His family had never mentioned anything about inherited money. The Elena Rodriguez Memorial Trust has been growing for 53 years, Marcus. Conservative investments, compound interest, dividends reinvested. As of this morning, the trust holds assets worth just over $2.3 million. Marcus stared at Warren in disbelief. Over $2 million. His family, who had struggled to pay for his school clothes, who worried about college tuition, had access to over $2 million. Why? Marcus began, then stopped, his mind reeling with questions. Why didn't Sophia tell you? Warren finished gently. Because Elena was very specific about the conditions for accessing the trust. The beneficiary had to demonstrate 3 qualities: genuine financial need, proven commitment to ethical business practices, and a deep understanding of the difference between wealth and money. Warren opened the trust document and showed Marcus the relevant passage, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting and translated into legal language. Elena wrote, "My descendant must learn through their own mistakes that quick profits are not sustainable wealth. They must understand that true prosperity comes from patient investment, ethical business practices, and commitment to community development. They must prove they will use inherited wealth to create opportunities for others, not just comfort for themselves." Warren looked directly at Marcus. "Your cryptocurrency losses, painful as they are, have actually qualified you to receive your inheritance. You've learned through experience what Elena knew intellectually, that gambling with money is different from investing money." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the revelation, the money he'd lost, the shame he'd felt, the lessons he'd learned the hard way. It had all been a test he didn't know he was taking. "But there's a condition, Marcus," Warren continued seriously. "The trust isn't a gift. It's a partnership. If you choose to accept your inheritance, you also accept responsibility for continuing Elena's work." Warren pulled out another document, this one a detailed proposal for Marcus's consideration. "Sophia and I have been working on a new initiative, expanding community development programs to serve the Asian American immigrant communities that your grandfather David worked with as an immigration attorney. We need a young person who understands both traditional wealth-building principles and modern technology to help us reach families who might benefit from micro-lending, financial literacy education, and business development services." Warren's voice carried excitement as he outlined the opportunity. "Your inheritance would provide the seed capital, but more importantly, your time and energy would provide the leadership. You'd be doing exactly what Elena did in 1957, taking on responsibility for helping other families build sustainable prosperity." Marcus felt the weight of opportunity and obligation settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about receiving money. It was about earning the right to carry forward a family legacy he'd never fully understood. "I need you to think carefully about this, son," Warren said kindly. "Because once you accept this inheritance, you're not just receiving money. You're accepting responsibility for honoring Elena's memory and continuing work that has transformed thousands of lives over 5 decades. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything Warren had shared. The family history he'd never known, the great-great-grandmother whose wisdom had shaped 3 generations, the trust fund that had been waiting for him to prove himself worthy. It was almost too much to comprehend. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know if I'm ready for this kind of responsibility. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was a financial genius, and then I lost everything in a cryptocurrency crash. How can I be trusted with my family's legacy when I couldn't even manage my own savings?" Warren's expression softened with understanding. "Marcus, the fact that you're asking that question is exactly why you're ready. Humility is the foundation of wisdom, and wisdom is what turns money into wealth." Warren pulled out one more photograph from his treasure trove of memories, this one showing a much older Sophia standing next to a young Asian American woman at what appeared to be a business opening. "This photo was taken just 6 months ago," Warren explained. "Your grandmother." Sophia was helping Jenny Huang open her family's first restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. Jenny's parents had been working in other people's restaurants for 15 years, saving every penny, but no bank would give them a business loan. Warren's voice carried the satisfaction of seeing a system working exactly as intended. The Rodriguez network provided Jenny's family with a $25,000 microloan, business planning support, and mentorship from other successful restaurant owners in our network. Jenny's Authentic Szechuan opened in March and is already turning a profit. Warren looked directly at Marcus. "That's what your inheritance could fund, son. Not just Jenny's family, but dozens of families like hers. Young entrepreneurs who have the work ethic and vision, but not the access to capital or business networks." Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a sense of purpose that was different from his previous dreams of getting rich quickly. This wasn't about accumulating wealth for its own sake. It was about using wealth as a tool to create opportunities for others. "What exactly would I be expected to do?" Marcus asked, his voice stronger now, more focused. Warren smiled, recognizing the change in Marcus's tone. "You'd start by spending 6 months working directly in our existing community centers, Phoenix, Denver, San Antonio, learning the business from the ground up, understanding how microlending works, how financial literacy programs are structured, how we evaluate potential borrowers." Warren pulled out a detailed training program outline. "Sophia has developed a comprehensive curriculum that covers everything from basic accounting to community organizing to cross-cultural communication. You'd be learning not just from her, but from the community development professionals who've been doing this work for decades." Marcus scanned the training program, impressed by its thoroughness and rigor. This wasn't going to be easy or quick. It was going to require the same kind of patient, sustained effort that Elena had put into building her original business. "After your training period," Warren continued, "you'd work with Sophia to identify the best location for a new Asian American Community Development Center. We're thinking either Los Angeles, Seattle, or New York, cities with large, diverse Asian immigrant populations that could benefit from culturally appropriate financial services." Warren's enthusiasm was evident as he described the potential impact. The Asian American community represents one of the fastest growing immigrant populations in the United States, but they often face unique challenges accessing traditional banking services. Language barriers, cultural differences, lack of credit history, the same problems Elena's community faced in 1957. Marcus was beginning to see how his own family background, bilingual, bicultural, understanding both Asian and American business practices, could be valuable in ways he'd never considered. "Your role would be similar to what Elena did originally," Warren explained. "You'd be the bridge between the community and the financial systems they need to build wealth. You'd help families understand credit, assist with business planning, provide ongoing mentorship and support." Warren paused, letting the scope of the opportunity sink in. But Marcus, I want you to understand something important. This work is not glamorous. You won't be making quick profits or impressing people with your trading prowess. You'll be sitting in community centers, helping families fill out loan applications. You'll be teaching financial literacy classes in the evenings. You'll be celebrating when someone opens their first business bank account. Warren's voice carried the weight of experience. Some weeks you'll feel like you're not making any difference at all. The progress is slow, the setbacks are frequent, and the rewards are often invisible until years later when you see a family's children graduating from college or a small business owner hiring their first employee. Marcus found himself thinking about his grandmother Sophia, spending decades doing exactly this kind of quiet, patient work while he'd been dismissive of her small-scale thinking. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus said slowly, "I need to ask you something. Honestly, do you really think I can do this? Do you think someone who was arrogant enough to dismiss his grandmother's wisdom and lose his savings on cryptocurrency speculation can really be trusted with this kind of responsibility?" Warren leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the same careful attention he'd given to thousands of investment decisions over the decades. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen human nature in all its complexity. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. Your cryptocurrency losses don't disqualify you from this work. They're precisely what qualifies you for it." Warren stood and walked to a wall where several framed letters were displayed. Thank you notes, graduation announcements, business opening invitations accumulated over decades of community development work. Every single person whose life has been changed by the Rodriguez network started from a place of financial vulnerability. Elena herself lost her original dreams when her family's circumstances forced her to consider giving up college. Sophia had to rebuild everything after her mother's death. I've seen hundreds of successful business owners who started with nothing but determination and someone willing to take a chance on them. Warren turned back to Marcus, his expression serious, but encouraging. The difference between people who build sustainable wealth and people who just chase quick profits isn't intelligence or luck, it's character, and character is often forged through failure. Warren pulled out a thick binder filled with case studies from the Rodriguez Network's loan program. "Let me show you something, Marcus. These are the files of borrowers who have had the highest success rates in our microlending program. Want to guess what they have in common?" Marcus shook his head, genuinely curious. 93% of our most successful borrowers had experienced significant financial failure before receiving their first loan from us, Warren revealed. They'd lost jobs, had businesses fail, declared bankruptcy, made investment mistakes, but that failure taught them humility, caution, and the value of patient wealth building. Warren opened one of the files, showing Marcus a loan application from 2015. This is Roberto Mendez. He lost his construction business in 2009 because he'd expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt, trusted the wrong partners. He spent 4 years working for other contractors, paying off debts, rebuilding his credit. When he applied for a loan from us in 2015, he had a business plan that was conservative, realistic, and based on hard-learned lessons about sustainable growth. Warren showed Marcus photos of Roberto's current business, a successful contracting company with 15 employees and a reputation for quality work and fair prices. Roberto told me once that losing his first business was the best thing that ever happened to him. It taught me the difference between being busy and being profitable, he said. It taught me that growth without foundation is just a recipe for a bigger failure. Warren closed Roberto's file and looked directly at Marcus. Your cryptocurrency losses taught you the same lessons, son. The difference between speculation and investment. The importance of understanding what you're putting your money into, the danger of confusing luck with skill. Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in Warren's words. His brief success with cryptocurrency had made him overconfident, dismissive of traditional investment wisdom, convinced that he'd discovered some secret that previous generations had missed. "But there's something else I want you to understand," Warren continued. "Elena's trust fund has very specific conditions, not just for accessing the money, but for keeping it." Warren pulled out another section of the trust document, this one, detailing ongoing obligations for beneficiaries. "If you accept this inheritance, you're committing to work in community development for a minimum of 5 years. The trust will provide you with a modest salary, enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Any business profits from your community development work get reinvested into expanding the program." Warren's tone became more serious. "And if you ever use trust funds for personal speculation, stocks, crypto, any kind of gambling with money meant for community development, you forfeit the entire inheritance immediately." Marcus felt the weight of accountability settling on his shoulders. This wasn't going to be like managing his own savings, where his mistakes only affected himself. This was about being responsible for money that could change families' lives, trusted with resources that had been carefully preserved for over 50 years. "There's one more condition," Warren added quietly. "Once a year, you'll visit Eleanor's grave and report to her on what you've accomplished. Sophia has been doing this for 33 years. It's not a legal requirement, but it's a family tradition." Family tradition. Warren showed Marcus a photograph of a simple granite headstone with flowers placed in front of it. The inscription read, "Elena Rodriguez, 1940-1971. She taught us that wealth is what you leave in others." "Sophia goes every year on the anniversary of Elena's death," Warren explained. "She brings flowers, and she talks to her mother about the families they've helped, the businesses they've supported, the dreams they've made possible. She says it keeps her focused on what really matters." Marcus found himself imagining standing at that gravestone, having to account for how he'd used Elena's legacy. The thought was both intimidating and motivating. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus said slowly, "if I do this, if I accept the inheritance and commit to this work, what happens if I fail? What if I make mistakes? What if I'm not good at community development? What if I let down the families who are counting on me?" Warren's expression softened with something that looked like fatherly pride. "Marcus, the fact that you're worried about failing is the best indication that you won't. The people who fail in this work are the ones who think it's easy, who underestimate the complexity of helping others build wealth sustainably." Warren pulled out one final document, a simple handwritten letter on Sophia's personal stationery. "Your grandmother wrote this for you to read after our conversation," Warren said, handing Marcus the envelope. "She wanted you to hear Elena's story first, to understand the family legacy before reading her own thoughts about your future." Marcus took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing his grandmother's careful handwriting on the envelope. "For Marcus, with love and faith in your potential." Marcus carefully opened the envelope, his hand still shaking slightly from the emotional weight of everything Warren had shared. Inside was a single sheet of his grandmother's personal stationery, covered in her familiar handwriting, the same careful script he remembered from birthday cards and notes in his school lunchboxes. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began, and Marcus could almost hear his grandmother's gentle voice as he read. "If you are reading this, it means Warren has shared Elena's story with you, and you now understand the legacy that flows through our family like a river, carrying wisdom from one generation to the next. I have watched you struggle these past few months, not just with losing your money, but with losing your sense of direction. I've seen you dismiss the values your grandfather David and I tried to teach you, not because you are ungrateful, but because you are young and believed you had discovered a faster path to success. When you lost your savings in cryptocurrency, My heart broke, not for the money, which was just paper and numbers, but because I feared I had failed to pass on the most important lessons your great-great-grandmother Elena died trying to preserve. But now I realize that your losses were not my failure as a teacher, but rather Elena's wisdom working across generations. She wrote in her journal that each person must learn through their own experience the difference between building wealth and chasing profits. You have learned this lesson at 17, Marcus. I did not learn it until I was much older. Marcus paused, wiping tears from his eyes as he continued reading. Elena's trust fund has been waiting for you since before you were born. Not waiting for you to prove you were perfect, but waiting for you to prove you were ready to serve others with the same dedication she showed to her community. I have spent 47 years of my life in community development work, Marcus. I have helped over 3,000 families start businesses, buy homes, send children to college. I have seen dreams come true and watched hard work transform entire neighborhoods. But the most important thing I have learned is this: true wealth is not what you accumulate for yourself, but what you make possible for others. The money in Elena's trust fund is not your inheritance. The wisdom to use money wisely is your inheritance. Warren will offer you the opportunity to join our work, to carry forward what Elena started in that small grocery store 67 years ago. This is not a job, Marcus. This is a calling. This is your chance to discover what your great-great-grandmother knew, that the most satisfying way to build wealth is to help others build it alongside you. I cannot tell you what decision to make. That choice must come from your own heart, your own understanding of who you want to become. But I can tell you that if you choose this path, you will never wonder whether your life has meaning. You will wake up every day knowing that your work makes a difference in ways that ripple forward through generations. The boy who lost his savings chasing quick profits can become the man who helps other families build lasting prosperity. The teenager who dismissed his grandmother's wisdom can become the leader who preserves that wisdom for future generations. Whatever you decide, Marcus, know that you are loved unconditionally. Know that Elena's spirit lives on in your questions about right and wrong, in your capacity for learning from mistakes, in your ability to care about something larger than yourself. With all my love and faith in your future, Grandmother Sophia. Marcus set the letter down carefully, his vision blurred with tears that came from somewhere deeper than sadness, from a place where grief for his mistakes met gratitude for unconditional love and hope for redemption. Warren had been watching quietly, giving Marcus time to absorb his grandmother's words. When Marcus looked up, Warren's expression was understanding and patient. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Warren said softly. "In all my years of knowing Sophia, I've never seen her lose faith in someone's potential for growth. She sees possibilities where others see problems." Marcus nodded, still processing the depth of his grandmother's forgiveness and the weight of the opportunity she was offering him. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus said slowly, "I think I understand now why you called me. It wasn't just about the money I lost, or even about the inheritance. It was about helping me understand what wealth really means." Warren smiled, the expression transforming his face from serious investor to caring mentor. "Elena used to say that wealth is like water. It's only valuable when it flows. Money that sits still becomes stagnant, but money that moves through communities, creating opportunities and building dreams, becomes a source of life for everyone it touches." Warren stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the city where this story had begun more than 6 decades earlier. "Marcus, I've been investing for over 70 years. I've made more money than anyone could spend in 10 lifetimes. But the investment I'm most proud of, the one that has given me the greatest return on both capital and satisfaction, was that first $15,000 I put into Elena's family store in 1957. Warren turned back to Marcus, his voice carrying the conviction of a lifetime spent learning what really matters. That investment taught me that the best returns don't always show up in portfolio statements. Sometimes they show up in graduation, ceremonies, in business openings, in children who grow up believing they can achieve anything because someone believed in their family's potential. Marcus sat quietly for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned in the past few hours. The family history he'd never known, the legacy he'd never understood, the opportunity that was both inheritance and obligation. It felt like discovering he was part of a story much larger and more meaningful than he'd ever imagined. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus finally said, his voice steady with newfound resolve, "I want to accept the inheritance. I want to continue Elena's work. But I need you to know something first." Warren raised an eyebrow, curious about what Marcus felt compelled to confess. "I'm scared," Marcus continued honestly. "I'm scared that I'm not wise enough, not mature enough, not experienced enough to handle this kind of responsibility. I'm scared that I'll make mistakes that hurt the families who are counting on me. I'm scared that I'll disappoint my grandmother and dishonor Elena's memory." Warren's expression softened with understanding. "Marcus, if you weren't scared, I'd be worried about your judgment. Fear of failure when it comes from caring about others rather than protecting yourself is the beginning of wisdom." Warren returned to his desk and pulled out a phone, dialing a number from memory. "Sophia," Warren said when the call connected. "He's ready. Yes, he understands everything. Yes, he's scared, which means he's taking it seriously." Warren paused, listening to Sophia's response, then smiled. "She wants to talk to you," Warren said, handing Marcus the phone. "Grandmother," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "My dear boy." Sophia's familiar voice came through the phone, warm with love and pride. "Warren tells me you're ready to begin. Are you sure this is what you want? Not what you think you should want, but what your heart is telling you." Marcus took a deep breath, thinking about everything he'd learned, everything he'd lost, everything he might gain. Not in money, but in purpose and meaning. "Grandmother, I spent weeks feeling ashamed about losing my savings, but sitting here, learning about Elena and understanding our family's story, I realized that losing that money was the best thing that could have happened to me. It taught me humility. It made me ready to learn." Sophia's voice carried obvious emotion as she responded. "Elena would be so proud of you, Marcus. She always said that the most important investments are the ones we make in people who are ready to grow." "When can I start?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own eagerness. "Next Monday," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Warren will arrange your travel to Phoenix, where you'll begin your training with Maria Santos, our most experienced community development coordinator. She's been doing this work for 22 years, and she'll teach you everything Elena taught me about serving families with dignity and respect." Marcus felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. Next Monday, in less than a week, his entire life would change direction. "Grandmother," Marcus said softly, "I'm sorry for dismissing your wisdom. I'm sorry for thinking I knew better than generations of experience. I'm sorry for not understanding how important this work is." "Oh, sweetheart," Sophia replied, her voice gentle with forgiveness. "You don't need to apologize for being 17 years old. You need to thank yourself for being wise enough to learn from your mistakes. That's what Eleanor's trust fund was. Designed to reward, not perfection, but the capacity for growth." Warren gestured for the phone, and Marcus reluctantly handed it back. "Sophia," Warren said, "I'll handle all the logistics. Marcus will be in Phoenix Monday morning ready to begin. And Sophia, Elena would be proud of all of us today." Warren hung up the phone and turned back to Marcus with the expression that mixed satisfaction with anticipation. "Congratulations, Marcus. You're about to begin the most challenging and rewarding work of your life." 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of a small storefront in Seattle's International District, holding a set of keys that represented far more than access to a building. The sign in the window read, Asian American Community Development Center, opening soon, and Marcus could hardly believe that he was about to become the center's first director. The training in Phoenix had been intense, humbling, and transformative. Maria Santos had been a patient but demanding teacher, insisting that Marcus understand every aspect of community development work from the ground up. He'd spent his first month simply observing, watching Maria conduct financial literacy workshops, sitting in on loan application meetings, helping families navigate the complex paperwork required to start small businesses. Community development, Maria had told him during his first week, is not about being a savior. It's about being a partner. You're not there to solve people's problems for them. You're there to provide the tools and support they need to solve their own problems. Marcus had learned to conduct home visits with potential borrowers, understanding that evaluating loan applications required much more than reviewing financial statements. He needed to understand family dynamics, cultural backgrounds, community connections, and personal goals that might not show up in any formal document. He'd helped the Gonzalez family open their first restaurant, watching Carlos and Maria work. 18-hour days to build something that would support 3 generations of their family. He'd celebrated with the Nguyen family when their teenage daughter received a full scholarship to Arizona State University, funded partly by profits from the tailoring business the Rodriguez network had helped them start. Most importantly, he'd learned that the work was as much about listening as it was about lending. Every family had a story, dreams that had been deferred by circumstances, potential that had been overlooked by traditional financial institutions. Now, standing in front of his own community center, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that Elena must have felt when she first stood behind the counter of her family's grocery store. The difference was that Marcus had the benefit of 67 years of accumulated wisdom, a proven model for success, and a support network that stretched across 12 cities. Warren had flown in for the opening ceremony, along with Sophia and community development coordinators from Rodriguez network centers across the country. Local city officials were expected, along with representatives from several Asian American community organizations who had been eagerly waiting for culturally appropriate financial services. Nervous? Warren asked, approaching Marcus as he stood, contemplating the significance of the moment. Terrified, Marcus replied honestly, but also excited. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters. Warren nodded with understanding. Elena wrote in her journal that the day she opened her store was both the scariest and most hopeful day of her life. Scared because she knew how many people were counting on her success. Hopeful because she finally had the chance to prove what was possible when someone believes in your potential. Marcus looked through the window at the interior of the center. Loan offices designed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. A classroom set up for financial literacy workshops, a small library of business planning resources translated into multiple Asian languages, and a children's area where kids could play while their parents attended meetings. Mr. Buffett, Marcus said, I've been thinking about something Elena wrote in her journal about wealth being what you leave in others. I'm starting to understand that this isn't just about the families we'll help directly. It's about creating a model that other communities can replicate. Warren's expression showed approval for Marcus's deeper understanding. That's exactly right, son. Elena's original grocery store is still operating, you know, still serving the same neighborhood, still owned by the same family. But more importantly, it proved that community-based economic development could work anywhere, with any population, as long as you had patient capital and genuine commitment to service. Sophia approached them, carrying a small wooden box that Marcus recognized from her home. Marcus, she said with obvious emotion, I have something for you. Something Elena left specifically for whoever opened the first Asian American Community Development Center. Sophia opened the box to reveal a simple brass key, old and worn but carefully preserved. This was the key to Elena's original store, Sophia explained. She kept it even after they moved to a larger building, and she left instructions that it should go to the family member who carried her work into a new community. Marcus took the key with trembling hands, feeling the weight of history and expectation. She believed, Sophia continued, that someday our family would have the opportunity to serve communities beyond the Hispanic immigrants who were her original focus. She dreamed of a network that could help anyone who needed a chance to build wealth sustainably and ethically. Marcus fastened the key to his own keyring, understanding that he was accepting not just a symbolic token, but a commitment to values that had guided 3 generations of his family. 1 year later, Marcus sat across from Jenny Kim, a 23-year-old software engineer who wanted to start a mobile app development company focused on serving Asian American small businesses. Jenny had the technical skills and a solid business plan, but no access to startup capital and no connections to the business community she wanted to serve. "Tell me about your family's story," Marcus said, having learned that understanding someone's background was essential to evaluating their potential for success. Jenny's story was familiar yet unique. Parents who had immigrated from South Korea with engineering degrees that weren't recognized in the United States, who had worked in convenience stores and dry cleaners while their daughter excelled in school and eventually graduated from the University of Washington with a computer science degree. "I want to build something that honors my parents' sacrifice," Jenny explained. "They gave up their careers so I could have opportunities they never had. But I also want to help other immigrant business owners succeed by giving them access to technology that can level the playing field with larger competitors." Marcus reviewed Jenny's business plan, impressed by its thoroughness and cultural sensitivity. Her proposed app would help small Asian American businesses with everything from inventory management to customer loyalty programs to multilingual marketing materials. "Your technical skills are obviously strong," Marcus said, "and your market research is excellent. But I want to understand something else. How do you plan to stay connected to the community you're serving as your business grows?" Jenny's answer showed that she understood the deeper principles underlying the Rodriguez Network's approach to wealth building. "My parents taught me that success without service is empty," she said. "As the business grows, I want to hire other Asian American developers, create internship programs for students from immigrant families, and donate a percentage of profits to organizations that provide financial literacy education." Marcus felt the same sense of excitement he'd experienced dozens of times over the past year when he recognized someone whose values aligned with Elena's vision of wealth as a tool for community development. "Jenny," Marcus said, "I'd like to recommend you for a $25,000 startup loan, with the option to expand that to $50,000 after 6 months if you meet performance benchmarks. But more than the money, I want to connect you with our network of business mentors and potential customers." Jenny's face lit up with the kind of joy Marcus had learned to recognize, not just happiness about receiving financial support, but relief at finding someone who understood her dreams and believed in her potential. After Jenny left, Marcus sat quietly in his office, thinking about how much had changed since that rainy evening when he'd stared at his laptop screen watching his savings disappear. The teenager who had lost $23,000 gambling on cryptocurrency had become a young man responsible for managing $2.3 million in community development funds. But more than that, Marcus had discovered something about wealth that no investment textbook had ever taught him. True wealth wasn't measured in portfolio values or net worth statements. It was measured in opportunities created, dreams enabled, and communities strengthened. His phone rang, interrupting his reflections. "Marcus," it was Warren's familiar voice. "I have someone I'd like you to meet. There's a 17-year-old kid in Portland who just lost his college savings trading options. His grandmother is worried about him, and his story sounds remarkably familiar." Marcus smiled, understanding immediately what Warren was asking. "When can I drive up to meet him?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow, if you're available. His name is David Park, and he reminds me of someone I once knew. Someone who thought he was too smart for his family's old-fashioned advice about patience and compound interest." Marcus laughed, remembering his own arrogance from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus said, "I think David Park is about to learn that losing money quickly can be the first step toward building wealth slowly. And I think I know exactly where to start his education." The next morning, Marcus drove north from Seattle to Portland, carrying with him Elena's journal, photographs of the Rodriguez Network's success stories, and his own story of transformation. From failed speculator to community development leader, he found David Park exactly where Warren had predicted, sitting in his bedroom, staring at trading charts, trying to figure out how to recover losses that felt insurmountable to a 17-year-old who had never experienced real failure before. "David," Marcus said gently after David's mother had led him upstairs, "my name is Marcus Chen. Warren Buffett asked me to come talk to you about what it means to lose everything and discover that it's actually the beginning of everything." David looked up with the same mixture of shame, confusion, and desperate hope that Marcus remembered feeling 1 year earlier. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus continued, settling into a chair across from David's desk. "You're thinking that you're stupid, that you've ruined your future, that you'll never be able to face your family or friends again. You're thinking that the money is gone forever and that you've learned your lesson too late to matter." David nodded miserably, recognizing himself in Marcus's words. "But what if I told you that losing that money was the most valuable thing that could have happened to you? What if I told you that it qualified you for opportunities you never could have imagined? What if I told you about a 17-year-old girl named Elena Rodriguez who faced her own financial crisis in 1957 and turned it into a legacy that has changed thousands of lives?" Marcus opened Elena's journal to the first page and began to read aloud, just as Warren had done for him 1 year earlier. "True wealth is not about having money. True wealth is about having choices. Money gives you choices, but only if you understand the difference between building wealth and chasing profits." David leaned forward, captivated despite himself by the wisdom of someone who had faced similar challenges decades before his birth. "David," Marcus said, closing the journal and looking directly at the young man whose story was just beginning, "would you like to hear about the investment opportunity that changed my life? It doesn't involve cryptocurrency or stock options or any kind of quick profits, but it might teach you something about wealth that no market crash can ever take away." Outside David's bedroom window, Portland stretched toward the horizon, full of families with dreams, young entrepreneurs with potential, and communities waiting for someone to believe in their possibilities. The story that had begun with Elena Rodriguez in 1957 was ready to begin a new chapter, with a new young person learning that true wealth flows like a river, carrying opportunities from one generation to the next. Marcus began to tell David about Elena, about Sophia, about Warren's patient wisdom and the community development network that had grown from a single grocery store into a movement. He told him about the choice between gambling with money and investing in people, between accumulating wealth for yourself and creating opportunities for others. And as he spoke, Marcus realized that he was no longer just inheriting Elena's legacy. He was creating it anew, passing forward the wisdom that had been passed to him, continuing the story that would outlive them all. The afternoon sun streamed through David's window, illuminating two young men, separated by only a year in age, but connected by the timeless truth that Elena Rodriguez had discovered in her brief but impactful life. Wealth is what you leave in others, and the best investments are the ones we make in each other. 5 years later, Warren Buffett stood at Elena Rodriguez's graveside on a crisp February morning, accompanied by Sophia, Marcus, and David Park, who had become the director of the newest Rodriguez Network Center in Portland. The simple granite headstone was surrounded by flowers from dozens of families whose lives had been touched by Elena's legacy. "Elena," Sophia said softly, as she had done every year for 38 years. "We've helped 837 families start businesses this year. We've provided financial literacy education to over 3,000 people. We've proven once again that patient capital and genuine care can transform entire communities." Marcus stepped forward, adding his own report. "The Asian American Centers in Seattle and Portland have facilitated over $12 million in community investment. Jenny Kim's app company now employs 47 people and has helped over 2,000 small businesses modernize their operations. David has already identified 6 families in Portland who could benefit from our next expansion." Warren listened to these reports with the satisfaction of someone who had seen an investment mature beyond his greatest expectations. But he was also thinking about something Elena had written in her journal. "The most important seeds are the ones that produce trees whose fruit feeds people you will never meet." As they walked away from Elena's grave, Warren pulled out his phone and made a familiar call. "Hello, Susan?" he said when the call connected. "I have a story to tell you about a 19-year-old college student in Denver who just lost her tuition money trading penny stocks. Her great-aunt thinks she might benefit from learning about patient capital and community development. Do you think Marcus or David might have time to drive down and share Elena's story with her?" The cycle continued, as Warren knew it always would. Somewhere, there was always another young person learning the hard way that quick profits and sustainable wealth were two entirely different things. And somewhere, there was always someone ready to share Elena Rodriguez's timeless wisdom. True wealth is what you leave in others, and the best investments are the ones we make in each other. The story that had begun with a 17-year-old immigrant girl behind a grocery store counter in 1957 lived on, growing stronger with each generation, proving that some legacies are measured not in dollars accumulated, but in dreams enabled, communities strengthened, and lives transformed. Elena's journal, now carefully preserved in the Rodriguez Network's archives, contained one final entry that Warren had shared only with Sophia and Marcus. "I may not live to see all the good that will grow from the seeds we are planting, but I have faith that each person who learns these lessons will teach them to others. Wealth is like love. It only grows when you give it away. And the most valuable thing we can leave behind is not money, but the wisdom to use money well." The sun set over Omaha as Warren returned to his office, already thinking about the next phone call, the next young person who needed to learn that losing everything could be the beginning of gaining everything that really mattered. Elena's story lived on, not in monuments or buildings, but in the lives of people who understood that true wealth is what you leave in others. He never asked for thanks. For him, the legacy wasn't money. It was what you left in others. If this story reminded you that one failure doesn't define a future, like this video and subscribe to Panorama Legacy. Each click helps us share stories that don't scream for attention, but quietly reshape how we see the world. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and which part of this young investor's journey hit closest to home. And if you're ready for another story, one about second chances, quiet guidance, and the unexpected call that changes everything, click on the next video on your screen. Because sometimes the help we need comes from a voice we didn't expect at the exact moment we're ready to listen.